So we're ready for action. I've got Alistair Scott with me today. I'm really excited because it's one of those fantastic people I've met during my time in the UK, and he's part of, well, he has been a very important actor of the British Interplanetary Society. Still is now, with barman and
back in
actually more duties. But yeah, so can you tell me a bit about yourself?
Well, I suppose it goes back. I was born at a very early age, which is fairly normal. But what I jokingly say, I was born in China in 1997. That causes a bit of concern.
Because of the accent, of course.
Well, I do look a bit older than 1997, but of course, being born in Hong Kong, it was a British colony when I was born, so yes. I do have a British passport. But it has caused problems going back to Hong Kong because they think I was probably born there and therefore I should be Chinese. But anyway, no, and then we moved to the Philippines, then we moved to Bangkok, then we moved to Malaysia, or Malaya as I knew it. And each place was very different. Yeah. But I think what that gave me was this feeling of being able to move and ready to move at any moment. And also it gave me the chance to actually get into aircraft. And so from the age of 3 I'd been flying in DC-4s, Dakotas, and also super constellations and things. So
no.
Yeah, that's how we got to Baguio from Manila and how we got to Singapore from Manila.
Fantastic.
So those were the early days. And then when I came back to school in this country, I was flying out every summer to my parents in Malaya, and that was in Comet 4s. So I got to fly in all of those every summer. So it was a bit of an education, but there again, it was something I enjoyed, and that's what got me into aviation.
Were you bothering the pilot every time, saying like, can I fly with you? Can I see the cockpit?
I was bothering more the passengers around me because I insisted on turning on and off all the lights above and seeing how everything worked. So. But when we were in Bangkok, I forgot to mention that John Cunningham brought out the first Comet 4 to do the hot and high trials, and my dad brought me and my brother along to the airport in Bangkok, and we looked around it, and it was so full of equipment at the back that it wasn't really what I thought was an airliner. But John Cunningham was the captain then, and leaping forward, he was the last person I flew with in the 125 business jets many years later. That was back in about 80.
And he did remember you then? He was the first one?
No, he didn't actually remember me.
Okay,
no,
but you did remember him.
I reminded him we hadn't met before. But
how does it compare when you were flying in all those aircraft? Obviously now there's very little vibration. I mean, it's quite rare that you really have any disturbances in the aircraft. How was it like that?
Dakotas and small aircraft, Fokker Friendships and things were really quite fun because you could see the ground the whole time. You did get thrown about a bit, especially in some of the stormy areas and monsoons. We had some nasty times in the Comets as well, mainly getting into places like Delhi. And then that's where they'd always change crew. We'd start with a crew from London that would change at Delhi, and then we'd go on from there. And you're talking of a 26-hour flight in those days.
In those aircraft.
But it was only 4-hour each stop was about between 2 and 4 hours. So we got out in Colombo and places like that and looked around, Tehran, in fact almost everywhere along the route. So it was a very relaxed way of flying. Yeah. But yes, we did get thrown around a bit.
It's relaxed in between, but
yes, and of course the temperatures rose as you got further and further out. So we would get to Colombo and bake, and then go up to Delhi and get soaked with the monsoons. So yeah, those were great fun, but. A long time. It took us, as I say, 26 hours to get to Kuala Lumpur.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it was good.
You must have been quite privileged because I mean, at that time, flying wasn't that common for most people.
Well, it was. Yeah, it was fairly rare. I think prior to that we went everywhere by ship. To and from Singapore mainly, and we used to stay in Raffles Hotel and then get the ship from there back through the Suez Canal. So yes, we did a lot of our tours by ship. And then the aircraft, of course, came along, and once first of all, the Britannia, the Whispering Giant it was known, did the trips out to Rangoon and everything, but they had a lot shorter flight times than we had on the Comet. And I suppose we got used to it. And in fact, when I flew, they had the Lollipop Special, which would have about 150 kids on board, all going out to meet up with their parents.
The Lollipop Special, what a name.
That was it, yeah. And we got the same crew every year. So they knew us quite well by the time we'd done it for about 4 or 5 times.
Like, that kid, I absolutely hate him. I don't want him on board anymore.
Yeah, well, actually, I won't. Well, maybe I will tell the story. But I and my twin brother were known as the Ginger Tops.
The Ginger Tops.
I was rather more gingery than I am now. So
have a drink.
Well, maybe I should, because I'm going on a bit.
I mean, it's fine. That's why I love talking with Alistair. It's always fantastic because he's just full of stories and surprises. And you're a living encyclopedia, in my opinion. But maybe I'm not as knowledgeable. So hopefully in 50 years I'll be doing the same. I don't know. But
well, you probably will. I think that the stories that you've got to tell. I think if we'd had you in last Wednesday when we did that. Human space flight, they were asking if anyone had gone on analog missions.
Oh!
So you would have been perfect, but sadly you weren't there.
You could have called me, so
well, we should. We could have put you on screen.
I'd be in the lab with my glasses, like yes. So how was it actually?
It was very good. I was astonished the people that came out of the woodwork, because we got a succession of medical type people looking back at. Looking back and then saying what we should do for the future. So we were looking at that fairly seriously, and they all agreed that the psychology side of it is actually quite important.
I think, I mean, at the moment, I had to give Cyril talk about space exploration, going to Mars, and we're really not ready, huh? I mean, from both a physiological standpoint, radiation shielding, just how are you going to behave on Mars? Are you going to survive the journey? But also just psychologically, we don't know. We don't know how you're going to react when you see Earth from so far away. You don't know if you're going to kill your teammates. And also, I think the people that you need, like the explorers that you need for Mars, they're not necessarily the same ones who are going to withstand 6 months or 7 months.
They're used to being out there on their own, doing their own thing.
Exactly. Yes. So putting them in a ship, it's like.
Well, I think the Royal Navy with the submariners has already met that problem, and we're hearing about it now. And I think there are other organisations like the people in Antarctica and on the North Pole. They have similar problems, and of course they're doing 6 months there. And yes, we've heard of their problems. So I think we've a lot to learn from them before we start trying to do it ourselves. Though we are starting to look at hibernation.
I think
as an alternative.
I think that would be the alternative. I mean, it would be great to have the psychological training that you could, have different types of people still doing the same job. But I mean, it's difficult to think how you're going to be, fidgeting during those months. I mean, when you read about causation, you read about how active it's going to be, how much work it's going to be, and then the months before you just like not twirling your thumbs, but quite so.
I think so. But of course, the people that were talking this time were actually explaining quite how busy people are on the ISS, because the day-to-day, apart from doing two hours of exercise, the day-to-day changeover of pieces of kit and new crews coming on board and everything else.
The maintenance is, I think 40%, no, not 40, 30% of the time.
Something like that. It was a lot more than I thought. Yeah. And of course, the time they get to do lab-type experiments and things. And it's fascinating. Last week week before last, I was up in Liverpool, where we were invited to talk to the space cluster up there, which is the Northwest Space Cluster. And it's fascinating. People came out of the woodwork from the universities. There were 3, Liverpool Hope, Liverpool University, and Liverpool John Moores. All had something to say about the medicine side of it. They were all looking at various areas. One of them was building muscles. And putting them up on the ISS.
Oh, so 3D printed muscles?
They were growing them in trays. Yeah. And then, of course, what they said, they looked around the audience and said, "We won't be taking you 70-year-olds up there." So I said, "Thank you. I I didn't volunteer anyhow.
You should.
Well, because they can get the mussels to age 4 times as fast up there. So why not just grow them there, send them up there, and they come back 4 months older. So, or 4 times older, depends how long they're up there for. But no, it's fascinating, and these, we don't know what other people are doing. That's the problem.
There's a database of NASA's life science research. I think it's called Gene Lab or something like that. But otherwise, there isn't much, because I'm looking for my startups. We're looking into that, and it's complicated to just have an up-to-date literature review of all the space experiments. And the thing is, sometimes it's quite redundant what's being done. But the problem is that it's competitive. There's the whole pharma industry.
This is where you have to be very careful, because as we were discussing when we were up there, that some of it is you have to take out patents before you even mention the word.
Exactly.
My daughter keeps warning me because she's a patent agent, so
good to know.
I have to be a little bit careful. But yeah, it's amazing what is going on in this country, and this is the event we're running in Bristol.
So tell me more about the event. So it's called Space
Reinventing Space. We brought it over from Los Angeles, where it started as responsive space, and then it was more biased towards the military over there, but a lot of people from Europe went over there for it and learnt a lot. And then when they said, well, we can't really run it in the States anymore, so they said, would you want to bring it over to Europe? And we said, yes, please.
To ex-Europe, you mean?
Well, we weren't there. So yes, we brought it over in 2014. And that means we're now this year will be the 19th Reinventing Space conference.
Fantastic.
So it's been great, and I think what we're expecting this time is we're looking for the ideas for the future. We're looking at what are the sort of the frontiers for new space, and what the strategic areas that we have to cover before we can really see them blossom.
So including space medicine, for example?
It will, yes, I think we're looking at more, we would like to have some space medicine, but we're running another event in December, which is going to be called Beyond the Moon. And that's actually going to be looking more at what 10 things we have to do before we can go past the moon.
So Reinventing Space is 28th, 29th of November in Bristol?
In Bristol, yes. Aerospace Bristol, the museum, and we'll be having a dinner in the middle of it, on the 29th, which will be, I hope, the Sir Arthur Clarke Awards as well, and that'll be under the wings of Concorde. So you can't have anything better than that. Yep.
I'm really tempted to come.
Well, we'll invite you, and then you'll have to come.
I have no choice then.
But yes, there's so much going on at the moment, and we're also bringing in, for one day, we're bringing in the Space Energy Initiative, looking at, we're generally looking at space energy and the pros and cons, because I think we're getting as many people saying, well, why bother putting it up there, we can do it all.
So by space energy, what does it encompass?
Well, it's either beaming energy down from space. That was and it's how you generate the energy when you're up there.
So solar panels.
Well, solar panels is what we've been looking at, but also, of course, there's reactors of some sort which probably can generate as much power, but I mean, and probably as safely. But you've still got to beam it down, and you've got to have somewhere to collect it on Earth. So these are the problems I hope we'll be discussing.
So you're focusing more on really the collecting part of things?
Well, no, we've got a team that not part of us, but the SEI group, the Space Energy Initiative, has got a team that's actually designed a solar satellite, space-based solar power satellite. So and they already are looking very seriously at who's going to pay for it, because the energy companies are the people that we think will be looking for net zero solutions, and they have the money, as we've seen recently. They're generating money as if it was
gas and oil.
Well, let's say cash, or we are the cash cow, probably is the way we look at it at the moment. But no, I think we've got to look very seriously at the environmental issues as well, because obviously if you go green, you have to go green in producing it and getting stuff up there. And you also have to be green in bringing it down. So there are many things to be looked at.
Yeah, no, there's so many aspects to space. It's incredible. Like most people think that space is only the engineering side, but there's the whole sociological side, the whole human factors side, the whole sustainability side. I mean, space is responsible for so much of sustainability, like discoveries, like just climate change monitoring just comes from space. And obviously, you know, launching a rocket is not necessarily the most energy friendly thing, or CO2 emissions friendly, but actually the discoveries that you get out of them, like what we mentioned, the 4 months acceleration of muscle degradation. It's like, you know, thousands of hours of work and money and actually CO2 emissions from using industries on Earth.
I think we're learning more and more by the hour. In fact, another person that was at this on Wednesday is actually from Space Farm, and he was saying we've got no end of customers because they come to us saying, can we use space to do this, or will you help us do that? And he was saying they're just coming out of the woodwork, you know. And I think we've got to look very seriously at what space can do for them, and as you say, for other industries. And it's not just energy; it's medicine, it's everything.
And people are quite clueless. Like they have no idea how much space has affected them when there's like so many inventions around them. I've really developed the space. Even like the other day, I was one of the polymers that was used for like how's it called? When you're resetting your teeth, you know. Mouth guards and stuff like that. Developed by NASA, you know, the ISS. And I was like, fantastic.
Yes,
you know?
We've always had problems with trying to work out where the crossover is between what's been done in space and it's the same with the military. The military have the same problem because when we were designing satellites and missiles, actually, we started to make chipsets so small that you could fit them into as we now do, we fit them into a watch. But when I think that some of our early missiles had brains about that size, and of course I expect the Apollo lander had a brain about this sort of size, you know.
Even bigger.
and it had less capacity than most people's watches. So, no, I think we're beginning to learn. But where you actually see the crossover between something that was space-based to start with, or military-based to start with, and what it did for us on Earth, I think that's fascinating. But it's always very difficult to actually identify the value of that swap over.
Sometimes you see it only much later on, right?
We do, and in fact, I was speaking to, maybe we shouldn't name drop, anyway, the inventor of Beagle 2, and I was speaking to his wife, and she said yes, and to a colleague of mine that worked with me, and of course they've got the actual mass spectrometer that they designed for Beagle is now being used as a satchel type mass spectrometer for going out in the field, you know. And so this has come from Beagle, where it was only about this size, and they've now made it into something you can carry on your back. So
tell me, before we skipped a bit, you mentioned how you got interested in aircraft, but not about space.
Well, this is the trouble. I always say to people, you know, do what you like doing to start with, and you find that life will take you in automatically, without you saying or doing anything. It will take you in a path that you didn't know existed. And so what happened with me? I started, funnily enough, being a twin. We were both educated, first of all, in England and Scotland, and we didn't have A-levels from Scotland. We had hires. So we both wanted to do apprenticeships with aviation companies, aircraft companies. But when we went to one of them, they said, well, we can't take both of you because you're identical and we wouldn't be able to tell you apart.
Can you work 50% each?
No, I wanted 100%. And so the only difference is that tooth, you see. Okay. So I had to keep silent. But then what we did was we went to different universities as well. And suddenly I ended up at Hawker Siddeley doing my apprenticeship, which used to be de Havilland's. and my twin was at BAC at Weybridge.
Yeah.
And so, but then we ended up back in the same university anyhow, so we did our degrees in Bristol University, and then went back to our separate companies again. Of course, immediately I got back, I got put into the Airbus wing design team, and so I had a great time working out how to solve their problems, which were fairly major because of the size of the aircraft compared to the Comet and the Trident. And my twin then went in and started working on VC-10s and then got moved into the Concorde side. So we were immediately competing with each other, me Airbus and him Concorde. But then he decided that Concorde really didn't have a future in terms of number of customers.
Yeah.
And so he opted out and went teaching. But I stayed on. But because of my military background, I swapped from aircraft to defence systems. And then I was PA to the chief executive of that particular group, and he said, well, where do you want to go next? And then he decided for me. He said, you haven't been into space yet. So that was it. I got sent over in '84 into the space division.
Fantastic.
And they immediately recognised that I spent my childhood in the Far East and sent me back out there.
You know what? You go back.
Well, on the business jets, I was on the aircraft side. I was mainly used in Africa and Europe, and then on the missile side, I was used in both. Well, I suppose more in the North African, Middle East area, and then I started doing the satellite side in the Middle East as well. With Arabsat and people like that, and then I got sent back out to Korea and Japan and Indonesia.
What did you like the most? Like working on missiles, working on the aircraft, working on space?
Well, I suppose there's a bit of both. I mean, I enjoyed the aircraft side because you could talk to pilots and sell them the idea of something that you had in front of you. Missiles wasn't quite so easy because there were things that just disappeared off the end of it. So that wasn't quite so easy, but I suppose because I had the military background anyhow, the units that had those pieces of equipment would have to report to me wherever the battle was, so it was quite fun, knowing more than they knew.
It's like they screwed, so they don't know what they do.
It's just that they tended not to be as open with the information of what their equipment could do.
Yeah.
And of course I knew what it could do, so I would get them to rethink some of their ideas, which is probably not a good idea, trying to tell someone what to do. But and then of course on the satellite side, I then was sent back to university again, because those things that I thought were wings sticking out each side weren't. No, the solar panels. But there again, I then discovered
the colour should have been an indicator, but
yes, and the shape too. But actually, we do use them as wings because we use the solar wind to actually reposition our satellites.
Yeah.
You don't actually move them, but you rotate them and you twist them, and so that gives you focus on the Earth just using the solar rays. So that I learnt was aerodynamics in space.
Yeah.
But yes, it was a bit of a rude awakening having to go back to university again.
Yes, after what, maybe 10 years? Or
a lot more than that. That was more like. Well, it was getting on. Well, in fact, I left university in '72, and that was '84. So I suppose it was about 14 years.
Wow. Yeah. The best is you do like me. You stay at uni the whole time, and it's fine.
Well, yes, you have to relearn some of the physics, which is always interesting. Yeah.
I think you're usually more confident, you have so much experience and you're also a bit less stressed, than the first time you go to uni. So you're like welcome amongst youngsters, but at least I've got all this experience.
Well, actually, they ran a course for us of all our own, a 2-week course of all our own level of, and so I actually went there with 2 of my engineers from the production side.
Okay.
So it was quite fun actually. We learned how to drink again. It was a good course.
You'd learn how to eat chewing gum and put it on the table, but no, it's not a drinking time.
You learn a lot. You learn a lot from different cultures. Yes. And so yes, it was good fun. But no, it was fascinating to be actually taught again and to have to relearn it. But it was good. And I think then they sent me back out to Indonesia. and then Malaysia, and then Korea. Or Korea and Japan, I ended up in both. Oh, I was in Australia for a year and a half as well, forgot about that.
So which country have you not worked in?
Well, I wasn't allowed to go into the USSR or Russia for a long time, and in fact only once went behind the Iron Curtain, and had to be a bit careful there. So I've been around most of Africa, I've been around most of the Middle East, I've been around pretty well most of the Far East. Haven't done much business in Burma or India because they tend to come to us. I suppose I haven't spent that much time in China because they tend to do their own thing. So, and then I suppose if I go down to the Americas, I suppose I've been to all the launch sites, Canaveral in particular. And in South America, then Curitiba, spent a lot of time down there for launches, and actually ended up in Brazil and places in Venezuela as well. So yes, I've seen a bit of the world, but
a bit. You quite a bit, I think. What would you prefer? A takeoff from Concorde or Airbus aircraft, or a takeoff from a space shuttle or a rocket?
I think I'll stick to aircraft, actually. I think there's so many unknowns in going into space. I think we're still learning.
But I mean, from when, just from the gut feeling, the emotion, do you prefer the vibration from a rocket, or just seeing a very fat piece of metal going?
I suppose aerodynamics was my main interest at university, so I really like. And in fact, the story I keep telling, and I'm probably wrong, but on my second vacation from university, I was put straight into the wind tunnels with the same aircraft wing that I'd been designing the year before, which was made as a 10-foot model. And my job was to put the leading edge slats and the double slotted Fowler flaps in the right position for every launch condition. Then I set them all up and we got ready to go, and they pushed the button to start it all up. And what then happened was we had to shut it down immediately because we didn't realise how much lift we were going to get. It started to pull the bolts out the bottom of the wind tunnel. And so they had to quickly bolt them back down again and then start again, because this was the first supercritical wing, and we just didn't know how much lift we were going to get. I think the people
who designed make calculations.
You realise that Airbus wasn't designed on computers. We didn't have computers.
You had brains at the time.
Well, fingers and graph paper.
Yeah.
And I mean, when I did all the fuel slosh calculations, it took me 6 weeks to do the very first sum.
Yeah.
And I had to do it by counting the number of squares when looking on this side of the wing, and then counting the number of squares when looking from the top, and making the two the same by moving the angle of dangle of the fuel until they were matched. And then I knew I'd got the right shape. And then I knew that I'd got the fuel, and I then had to work the central gravity out of each fuel tank to work out how much the central gravity of the whole aircraft had moved back. Took a long time.
It's funny, I remember when I was working at Pilatus Aircraft, they had to make all calculations because they were changing the coatings on the airplane. They wanted to make a better one, and by changing it, they were changing the overall mass. And all the test flight engineers were like, "Well, we need to recalculate everything just because of this." But the change in mass was less than a kilo.
Yes, but it was.
Whereas back then, I bet you guys were probably off by.
We probably were, yes, and of course, if you repaint anything, that doubles the weight, and of course, where you put it also is important, because that can move the centre of gravity.
Exactly.
Quite seriously too. Anyway, I calculated that. Of course, the other thing was we were calculating everything in feet and inches, imperial units, and sending them to Germany, where they're
like 9.
where they were only using metric. So we all our design was done. So I calculated the centre fuel tank was going to move back the centre of gravity 7 feet, which is quite a lot. And of course, they didn't believe me when I went to my boss and said, "Yeah, 7 feet's the problem." He said, "It is a problem. We'll sit on its tail the moment you let the brakes off."
Yeah.
Especially if you add all the other tanks as well. And so we put baffles in. or we put baffles back in.
BIS was created in 1933.
1933, that's right. Yes, in Liverpool. Yeah,
and it's now the only oldest.
It's the only existing of the original
space advocacy
organisations.
There was in Germany, there was in the Soviet
and
Union,
the USA,
and in the USA, and they've all been absorbed by industrial stuff. Right?
Well, they've all either merged with other parts of the organisation, or they've changed their names completely and changed their aims completely. We've stayed as we were.
You stayed and changed. Wonderful.
Well, more or less. It's just the people that change.
Yeah.
So it's been a long, hard battle, and I think COVID is probably the most serious of the battles we had to face. Probably.
We're going through a World War and Iron.
Oh well, yes. During the World Wars, of course, or the Second World War, it closed down completely because most of the people that were here were working for establishments that you couldn't mention. In fact, a lot of them were on radar type programs and also on nuclear type programs. Yeah. So they were forbidden to actually join clubs and do anything. But in 1945, that's when Arthur C. Clarke, who had been doing radar in the RAF, he asked and sent a paper around council saying, I've got this idea and I wish to promote it. And that is that we should use this orbit, which is 36,000 kilometres, although he did it in
imperial units.
Imperial units. And we should be using it, and we should be selling the idea that it's for peaceful use of space, and that we can put 3 satellites on this orbit, and they will be able to talk to every part of the Earth at exactly the same time. And of course that's where geostationary orbit is, which was known as Clarke orbit. And a lot of people actually do still call it Clarke orbit, particularly the people in the USA. They still call it the Clarke orbit. And so I think we then started to build satellites to go up there. And first of all, I should say we. By then I was with Hawker Siddeley, and then I moved into British Aerospace, or it moved into British Aerospace, and I went with it. And so we were starting to build some of the biggest communication satellites for geostationary orbit. And so it was...
So it was more like an association that was building rather than just teaching about space?
Well, it was the BIS that was talking about it. They never actually built it. In 1938, you can see on the pictures on the wall, they started to, they did design a moon lander, which of course had the most, they thought they really ought to have a target as their very first, the JBIS, which started in 1934, the journal, actually has in it, we must find a target, we must have a reason for doing something. And so they decided on the moon at that very point. And that's when they designed the spaceship, and or the moon ship I should call it, and the moon lander to go with it. And so yes, we have the original drawings from 1938-39.
And when did you join the BIS?
Well, I suppose I was in aviation for the first half of my career, but then when I got through to about 1994, 93, 94, I felt that I was not meeting the right people, and I was also working very closely with the BIS at things like the IAC and various conferences they were running in Brighton, etc.
Yeah, because BIS was one of the 13 society members who
Yes,
founded the
yes,
IAC,
it is,
the International Astronautical Congress and Federation.
Federation in 1951. And so that's why we support it and continue to support it, because it really has opened the door to an awful lot of businesses, as we discovered in Paris.
And some very nice congresses also.
Yeah, some interesting ones.
In Paris.
Yes, some of us didn't get there in time for the croissant. I think we finished them by the time I got there. But no, I think in Paris we had a complete cross-section of people there, and the exhibitions were great. There was an awful lot to see. In fact, almost too much to see.
Yes, that's true.
And so many people to meet. I think the networking was phenomenal. Going back after not having the IAC. Well, they had the IAC in what,
in Dubai, yeah.
But that was a lot smaller.
Yeah, and also a lot was online. But actually, I think if you want even more people at the BIS booth, we can learn from the Australian booth that if you have beer, or the Swiss booth, if you have really good coffee, that's what you get.
Well, the Italian,
the best networking.
Yes, the Italian booths always had a lot of coffee. And of course the Netherlands
had Stroopwafel? No.
Well, they had lager.
Oh.
So they were in competition, but it is a good attraction.
It is. I was very surprised. I expected people to behave a little bit more, but actually that's how you do good networking, you know.
It is. It attract the right people and you're in. Most of the work is done, and this was the same within business, in fact. A lot of the business was done in the bar afterwards, and so not during the working day.
You start like trusting others.
Well, you also get this mix of people from, very often in your meetings during the day, you're really just concentrating on the people that you know are in the same business area as you. But when you go to the bar afterwards, you discover that there are people from all sorts of organisations in the bar with you. So it does rather spread the information around.
It does, yeah. And so when did you join BIS?
Well, I suppose I joined in about 1994 when I came back from the Far East and took on the responsibility for PR. And then I was working with Suzanne and the others here, and they persuaded me to join. So I'm a fairly late starter, but I continued as a member of the Royal Aeronautical Society, and they have a space branch there. But they don't tend to do the studies and the detailed examination of what we should be doing, and probably better at the politics than we are, because they tend to be doing it for aircraft as well. But no, I think when I came here, I found an awful lot of like-minded people to talk to. And the great thing here is that there's a mix of, well, 3 different levels. You've got the professionals, and that's where I suppose it all started. Pretty well all the engineers that we had working here from the 30s, 40s, 50s were in big aircraft companies that wanted to do space. So they tested their ideas out here and then went back to their companies and started to produce them.
So they tested it, and then when it crashed,
Well, here we were really working on paper. So we never actually, and Daedalus is probably the best example, because that really is an interstellar traveller, which it really is the Bible for many organisations, including, we believe, NASA, who look at it, well, if they've already done it, let's have a look and see if we can improve on it. And so I think there have been studies done by the Society that really no one else would have considered doing initially.
If you hadn't done it here.
But we did it, and therefore it's there and available. But I think now we're looking, it's this mix, as I was saying, with the professionals, and then we've got the enthusiasts. But the important bit, well, yes, I class you as a semi-professional enthusiast. But no, I think the other people that we're really benefiting from are the science fiction people, because their ideas are, to me, sometimes a bit way out. But if you can actually look at them seriously, and there are 1 or 2 authors that know the science as well, then you start to see a realistic side of it. And I go back to my interest in Dan Dare for some of that, the Eagle, because that turned me on to not just to space, but I think was that anyway. So there were an awful lot of things going on, and somehow Dan Dare seemed to be the future.
I think it does play a very big role. I mean, we were talking about it last year when I was doing training for a Moon Mars for the Chill Ice mission. Well, now it's IC Space. We had this class about art and just science fiction and things like this, kind of really make you passionate, and if you want to have the whole public's opinion and support, you need to have them on board, and you need to make them dream. If you just see the engineering side of things, you think, well, this is possible, and that's it. And also, used to budget constraint and things like this. Like, if you are always in your work mode, you just don't think it's possible.
Yes.
And it's when you write a book about saying, let's go to the moon. Even Jules Verne was talking about going to the moon, and that's how you get imagination going. And think, but what if? What if we went there? What if there was, and what if it was the most beautiful thing? What if there was a story to be told? And that appeals probably to like the human emotion, and it brings you to go further. Obviously, I mean, it's also nice sometimes to try out some new engineering, but usually when you're in company, you're just completely, choked up and restrained in what you're able to do. And science fiction is where you can go a step further. I mean, for me, like even going to Mars, it really went much more into picture when I started reading more science fiction about it. Suddenly I was like, well, yeah, maybe it would be like this, it would be like that. Also, it confirms some of your own opinion, because you think, well, I think it would be like this, but probably I'm the only crazy person who thinks like that.
Yes.
And then if you read somebody else's book, you're like, well,
that's what I think.
Yeah, and also maybe we have the same will to go. You have the same beautiful thing that you have in mind, this big dream, and that it's showing that you have the same dream. It's just one of the reasons I love the space community. It's because regardless if you're an engineer or a nerd or just somehow your toddler loves space and then you showed up at a space conference, there's this spark, this little stars, literal stars in your eyes, that make you want to go there, want to do something for it, just because.
Yeah, I think, and it's almost a clear field. You can go into almost anything, and suddenly space will show up as being a way out or a way of doing something. And I think we're discovering that more and more at the moment. But no, I think the other important thing is that this society becomes quite a good sounding board, because even during COVID, we were having all our evening lectures live. Or live streamed, I should say. And we'd get people telling us what they were going to do and what they were intending to do. And the discussion that went and the questions that came in were sometimes quite critical. You can't do that, that's been done before and you'll never be able to do that again. We've disposed with that theory, it won't work, sort of thing. And so it's a good sounding board for whether you've got things that are more or less right, or you've got it totally wrong. And this is where I find I can't really read fantasy science fiction.
Need you close to reality?
Well, I prefer stuff that I read about in the newspaper.
I mean, I do too, I must say. Like, what was it, when I watched The Martian, I was quite annoyed. And I remember once the astronaut chronically was giving his, I think it was when he was made honorary professor, and he was saying how Gravity was just such a bad science movie, and he was destroying every fact. And I think that's the point. At some point when you get too high level, you can't enjoy things the same way. But there's some stuff, like going to Mars, where we quite not there yet, so we can still imagine. I think that's half the battle, and I think there are some writers that actually do go as far as they can with what I call real science. But to learn about what is going on in some of the universities is an eye opener, because they really are looking to the future. And I think in this country, I think we have to seriously look at where these opportunities are, because they all have the chance to become, and we have the chance to contribute to bigger programs as well. So I think this is something very important, and the dreamers, as we call them, do have some very legitimate ideas that we should be considering. How do you think this is going to look like in 10, 15 years? Imagine we go back to the moon and then we go to Mars. How do you think it's going to affect this?
Well, I think we'll always be a treasure house of past information, as we saw from the archive upstairs. I think if people actually want to know how things were done in the past, then we can probably tell them, or let them browse our library or our archives. I think we've reached the point now, and this is one of our difficulties, where industry is doing very similar role to us. In other words, they themselves are looking for where to go next, and are being a little bit more secretive about it, whereas we're probably a little bit too open about some of our ideas.
You giving them up? I thought your daughter told you to be careful.
She did. I shall be more careful. But no, I think there are some. I think some of our technical programs have reached the point where industry is catching up with us, and therefore possibly we shouldn't push those any further forward, and we should look elsewhere. But no, I think the BIS will always be a talking shop, and I would like to think of it as being somewhere where people can test out their ideas.
I think that's wonderful to have this platform of both exchange of information and, you know, technology. Maybe not development in the way that maybe you won't hit the market, you know, but where you can test. Because sometimes it's also because you test that, you also make yourself a better engineer, a better scientist. So even if it doesn't have commercial application, it has a human application for the participants. And just talking about it, sometimes also it can be quite exclusive. I mean, if you can only work on really high-tech projects, obviously you don't get the job easily. If you can test it without having to join such a company, it's...
Yes, well, that's how it all began, and some of the studies, and we're still getting people coming to us and saying, look, I've got this idea, but I can't really do it at work because it's something... well, it possibly is something they won't consider real work, but I consider it's a way to go for the future. And that can be in all the different propulsion technologies, it can be in all the different energy production capacity and all this. There are so many areas where you may not be able to do it in industry, but you could certainly discuss it in somewhere like this. And we can also find some of the experts that we know exist within each business area.
So you can network.
Yeah, and also we can form a team around that person to develop the idea, which is happening at the moment. The technical team here is looking at very seriously at some of the ideas that are coming out, and we'll be discussing some of that in Beyond the Moon, because that is looking really at what ideas people are feeding in through papers and what ideas our own technical team are having.
Are you excited about Return to the Moon?
Well, yes, I'm not going to buy a ticket. But,
I mean, unless you can have an aircraft on the moon, you don't know, right?
Well, yes, I think they seem to consider helicopters as being the next thing to happen.
I think for Mars, for the moon, the atmosphere is too shallow.
It probably is, yes. So I think we'll probably be relying on vehicles when we go there.
Will a helicopter be okay for His Majesty?
Well, possibly, yes, we shall consider that one. But no, there's a lot to look forward to, and I think we will see the space industry continue to grow, particularly in this country. Whether we'll meet the targets that we set sort of 20 years ago, I don't know. But I think as long as a lot of interest was shown in the UK space policy as to whether it will support this sort of growth in the space business, and whether it is supporting the Earth observation side more than the human spaceflight side, or the commercial launch side, in other words, spaceports and things. They seem to have their fingers in so many different pies, you don't know who's going to get the next share out. But I think the cluster idea is great, and I saw it working in Liverpool, and I hope that every area will have a space cluster that can actually work out where to go and who to get money from.
And I have a final question. How was it to be president of the BIS?
Well, a bit unexpected this time. I was lined up for the last one. I said I would retire and do the presidency. I think I've come back in at rather a difficult time. COVID meant that we weren't able to use the headquarters here. All our tenants left, so we had no income from the building, and we lost a few members as well, because they felt that they weren't able to participate properly. We did benefit from the fact we'd been live streaming our talks for 2 years before COVID struck. So apart from moving the venue to my house, that was all I had to do. And so, yeah, it's been a tough time, and I think we've got tough times to come, because we will never recover the money that we lost over the last 2 years.
I mean, if we go back to Moon and Mars and, people get the enthusiasm back up.
Well, we'll do, I hope, yes.
Or maybe this video will help, I don't know. That would be great.
Yeah, we'll be expecting a great peak in our numbers.
I expect an invitation if it does.
If it does, you'll be back. Yeah. So yes, I think it is, we're beginning to understand how important the social media is. But it does have its downsides, and we've learned that one too. And sometimes you promote something and then suddenly something crops up and it says that won't work, and so you have to downsize and not do it. So we're hoping that we're so late in getting, and the other thing we've discovered is that so many people are doing things last minute. They won't commit to going to something.
No.
They won't commit to having a stand at somewhere until really the deadline. And the deadline is very often too late, because you can't actually
bring a Soyuz docking simulator all the way.
Yeah. We have done some last minute, but it's not so easy when the venue is asking you for information sort of 2 or 3 weeks before, and then suddenly you get this mad rush of people coming in at the last minute, all saying they want lunch or they want to stand and they want to. So we prefer people to come in a little bit earlier. But no, Reinventing Space should be fascinating, because the first day is rather more general. It'll be looking at manufacturing in space. It'll be looking at power subsystems in space. It'll be looking at, I think probably we'll leave the energy side of it to the day after. But the energy side will be, we're going to challenge it too. We're going to look at space-based solar power, but we know there are some papers in that will challenge it.
Yeah.
So it could be quite interesting.
I mean, somebody told me the other day that you need to have debate, you need to have those fights to actually really spark, the new engineering, the new research. So hopefully there'll be some
we always
fights.
used to, all our proposals in what was Astrium when I was last there, they were red teamed. We would get a red team in to really knock it aside and say, no, that's not the way to go. And we'd have to convince them that the way we were going was correct.
That's good.
So that's something we should be doing. And I think what was happening on Wednesday was a bit like that. Until the very end, where a young gentleman stood up and said, I am from the UK Space Agency. We'd been rather knocking the support we'd had from there, so it was interesting to hear him speak, and I think we've got a lot to learn. It's the people that are so important, and having the right people in the right place is so important, and I think they are. Well, I'm hoping they're beginning to get the right people in the right place to take us forward.
Yeah.
And I think it's looking good. But the BIS is still going to be here, and it's going to be, I hope, trying to make sure that everyone knows what's going on and that the new ideas come forward.
I think it's doing a wonderful job with both the journal, with Spaceflight magazine. You have a third magazine, right?
Yeah, we have the Space Chronicle, which is the history.
Exactly. So you got 3 magazines. You got lectures at the moment. It's almost every 2 or 3 weeks.
Well, they tend to be once a month. We aim for one, and then we have maybe 4 conferences in a year.
That's a
and
lot.
So it does work out to be quite a busy schedule.
How tired are you right now?
Well, I was getting the next one up and running until about 3 o'clock this morning.
See, so that's commitment. So this was Alistair Scott. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
If you want to add something, or if your throat is really parched and you want me to shut up, I don't know.
No, it's fine. I'm okay, but I just hope everyone that watches will join, because there's an awful lot, and we need people from all disciplines. I think all too often we get a focus on one area and then of course that dies off, and what we need is a good spread of interests, and science fiction is part of it.
Part of it. So live long and prosper. So if any Star Trek fans are usually, but thank you so much for joining today. I had a wonderful time with you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
And congratulations on what BIS does. It's like really, I think, a wonderful association, and I hope it stays that way for a very, very long time.
I hope so too.
Okay.